Hi there. Welcome to the Thursday, okay, wait a minute, I should have checked this. What's today? The 16th. April the 16th edition of Needlepoint TV. I'm Ellen Johnson, and I'm your host. I'm the owner of Serendipity Needleworks and the founder of the Stitchers Club, and I'm delighted to be here with you this afternoon. Thank you ever so much for taking the time to join me here today. I hope that you're having a wonderful day and that you will type in where you're watching from and let me know, maybe what the weather's like there, if you have a sunny day or if it's cloudy or if it's cold or whatever, because it's always fun for me to not only see where you're watching from, but also to find out, just exactly what's going on in your world. So I said we've got Susan from Birmingham is watching, and it's always great to be here with each and every one of you. If you happen to be watching this as a recording later, please leave your name and where you're watching from with me too, because I do like to go back and see who all has joined me and from where you have joined. So today we are embarking upon our spring Threadventure, spring 2020 Threadventure. The blog post is over on the Serendipity Needleworks website, and the very first stitch has been posted along with the stitch diagram. Actually, I think there are 3 diagrams over there, but for this week's stitch. And our first stop on the 2020 Spring Threadventure Garden Tour is the Fairchild Tropical Botanic Garden. I have to get that right. It's in Coral Gables, Florida. And if you haven't had a chance to pop over and check out the website or the blog post, I encourage you to do that after we get off here. I'm going to share that with you here in just a minute and show you the stitch for those of you who haven't had a chance to do that. But I do encourage you after we're finished to go over and check it out. Let's see. I'm going to take a peek in and see who all is here with us. Like I said, I'm assuming you can see me and hear me okay because I've gotten some thumbs up, so that's good. So we have 2 Susans and Christine and Donna. Oh, and she says it's sunny in Spring, Texas. Good deal. And Deborah, Ellen says cold from Southwest Michigan. So I guess spring is still a few weeks away with our friends at least north of the Mason-Dixon line for sure. Okay. So, and then we've got, oh my goodness, all kinds of folks. Debbie and Carol and Sherry and Ellie and Alice and Cindy and Esther. So people are beginning to find us now. I know that it's kind of, I guess, a challenge to keep up with where I am because I've been so many places here lately. So thank you for your patience with that. Of course, every Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock Central Time, we start here on the Serendipity Needleworks Facebook page. This is where Needlepoint TV is broadcast from, and it's where you will always find me on Thursday afternoons. So without further ado, I think we'll just dive right in. And I'm going to share my screen. So let me see. Let me do that really quickly. Go there. And you can see that this week, Spring Threadventure Week 1, the Fairchild Tropical Botanic Gardens. And so I'm going to click on that, and that'll take us through to the actual post. And I guess it's probably pretty obvious what we're going to be talking about today. You can see all these palm trees. And indeed, that is what the stitch for the day is today, is a stitch that you can use for the palm fronds on a needlepoint canvas that you may have. So I'm going to scroll on down to this canvas, which I absolutely love. I think it's a beautiful canvas. It reminds me of the beach. And that's my happy place. For those of you who know me or have been around for a while know that I absolutely adore going to the beach, and I could just sit and look at this canvas all day long and definitely could stitch it. So the palm fronds are the greenery, the part at the top of the tree, and the stitch that I had selected for today is called the Fishbone stitch. And you can see that I've got this divided up into steps because that makes it easier for you to be able to see how to execute the stitch. So we have step 1, step 2, step 3, and then you just continue doing the same thing over and over until you've covered the area that you're trying to cover. I have an example, and let me come back on screen with you, and I have an example of the stitch stitched, and I was going to share that with you too. And I stitched my example. I used two different kinds of thread. I stitched two different samples, and I used one thread, the first thread that I tested out on this, which worked quite well, and I chose to use it just because I happened to have it. I was working on another project with it, and I thought, well, hey, that'll work for palm fronds. So you can see here on this side, this is Vineyard Silk, and I've worked my samples on 18 mesh canvas. Now, the sample, the thread that I suggested the thread that I said that I used was actually straw silk, and this is it right here. So you can see the difference between the two. This is, again, on 18 mesh canvas. This is one strand of straw silk, and this is one strand of vineyard silk. So you get better coverage on a 18 mesh canvas with the straw silk. I used a laying tool to make that ribbon lay down flat on the canvas. You could also use, if you were working on 18 mesh canvas, you could also use DMC cotton embroidery floss. You could use Splendor silk embroidery floss, and the nice thing about using those two threads is that you can take different colors, different shades of green, and maybe even some browns that have a lot of green in them. You can take those and use single strands, blend single strands together, and put as many together as you need or want to achieve the desired coverage that you're trying to get, or for the look that you're trying to achieve. So you have that as another possibility for threads that you could use. Of course, you could always use something like on a 13 mesh canvas, Planet Earth silk. You could also use silk and ivory. I think silk and ivory would work on 18 count too, so that's another possibility for you there. I think really and truly your imagination is really your only limitation. The one thing that I would suggest is that when you're working this particular stitch, or something that, this stitch is worked in vertical rows, so that means up and down. So what you would want to do if you were trying to achieve angles, like if you look back, let me find that again. Let me share my screen again so that we can find this. So if you were working this canvas, for example, and you notice the fronds go off in different directions, well, if this stitch is worked in vertical rows, one way to get around that is to actually turn your canvas. So, and now let me come back and show you what I'm talking about again. So one way to get around that is to take your canvas, and if you're working, like for example here, this is the side. I know that because it's got the selvage on it. So if I wanted to work this on a painted canvas, and say one of my fronds was angled out this way, then I could turn my canvas so that when I stitch that, it's going to follow that painted line. So you can even turn it upside down. This stitch can be worked upside down, and you get just different directionalities based on how you turn your canvas. And that's going to be the easiest way to get the different directions when you're working with this particular stitch, because of the construction of it or the way that it's executed. So that is I love this stitch. It's really easy to do. It's a bigger stitch, so one thing you want to keep in mind is that you're going to need a larger area in order to execute the stitch. There's another stitch that you might consider using if you have a smaller canvas, and that is the fern stitch. Now, I didn't include the diagram for that here, but that is definitely a stitch that you could use for smaller palm trees or palm fronds on an ornament maybe, or a canvas where the tree is small, not like the one that's on the canvas that I shared with you over on the blog post. So something that I do want to make sure that I show everyone, and this is something that's new, something that we're going to be it's actually in progress. We haven't gotten all the stuff fixed yet, but you notice if you go to the header over here, or the navigation bar on the Serendipity Needleworks website, then when you click on this or move your mouse to the Threadventure, we've come in and we've divided the Threadventures into 3 different, the years that they actually took place. Now, right now, the information is not assigned to that particular drop down. So if you click on Threadventure 2018, you're not going to find anything because we have to go back and assign those. This was structured a little bit differently prior to today, but we are going to get all of the Threadventures organized so that it's easy for you to find what you're looking for. And Threadventure 2020 is, though, now it's current. So this information here is the basic information about us starting a new Threadventure. That was the post from last week, and this is, of course, the post from today. So let me go back now and stop sharing my screen, and am curious to know who has a canvas that has a palm tree on it. Does anybody have a canvas with a palm tree that you're working on? Because I would love to know that, and if you have started stitching your palm tree yet, or if you haven't, if you think you might use either the fern stitch or the fishbone stitch. And if you've maybe even tried the fishbone stitch before, has anybody tried the fishbone stitch? Tell me in the comments box because I'm just curious. This is a stitch that I've known about for a long time, and it has other applications too, but I particularly like it for this one. So, Sylvia says she's in snow-covered Omaha. Sylvia, I'm so sorry. I agree with Gwen. I'm so sorry. Hopefully the things will thaw out soon and you'll have lots of sunshine and warm spring days to come in the near future. So again, what you can use this stitch for is the palm fronds. Of course, there's always the trunk of the tree, and there are a variety of different stitches that you can use for that. Something that you could, some different stitches that you might consider using for the trunk of a palm tree would be maybe the woven stitch. Another stitch might be the herringbone stitch. And you could also use a horizontal Milanese stitch for a tree trunk on a palm tree. And of course, palm trees are not, well, palms are not just trees. Palms grow in a shrub-like form. Some of them are climbing. So you can use this particular stitch, the fishbone stitch, for all different kinds of palms. So, all right. Now, let me see. Carol says she doesn't have a canvas with palm trees, but she'll find one. Haven't used the stitch either, but it looks easy and fun. It is easy and it is fun, and it's really quite easy to compensate too. It's an oblique stitch, so that means that it's not over the same number of vertical canvas threads as it is horizontal canvas threads. In the case of this particular canvas, or this particular iteration of it, it's worked over 4 canvas threads and up 5. So that's, if it was a true diagonal, it would be over 4 and up 4, but an oblique stitch is when one number is different from the other. So the vertical number of vertical canvas threads is different from the number of horizontal canvas threads. And like I said, in this case, it's a 4 by 5 or a 4 over 5. So that is, it's a little, probably a little trickier to compensate than a true diagonal stitch, but what you want to do if you do find yourself in a situation where you have to compensate is you want to extend that length of that stitch as far as you can, following the same angle as closely as you can, and keeping that oblique angle as close to the original as possible. So basically what you would be doing is, instead of moving it out, you would just make the stitch shorter to fit into the desired space. So like I said, it's a good stitch for this particular application. It's not a hard stitch to do, and so anybody who's maybe done a little bit of adding decorative stitches to canvases, this would be a good one. I wouldn't say that I would do this one as a beginner. You can practice it, of course, on a doodle canvas, and if you feel comfortable doing it, then by all means go for it. But it is one I would say is probably more of an advanced beginner type stitch or of skill level. And the different threads, again, that you can use, any type of the silk straw is a good, or straw silk, I get that backwards all the time, is a good thread for this particular stitch, for this particular application actually. And then of course you can always use vineyard silk, you could use Splendor, you could use DMC floss, I'm trying to think of some other things. You could use, if you had a sparkly tree, you could use Neon Rays Plus. If you have a Christmas ornament and you want your palm fronds to sparkle, you could definitely use Neon Rays Plus. Any type of a ribbon type thread is going to work very well. You could use silk ribbon. You're going to need a narrow silk ribbon, so a 2 millimeter is going to be your, I would say, is going to be your best bet. Now, of course, that's going to depend upon whether or not you have a small canvas or a large canvas. You could use 4 millimeter on a 13 mesh canvas if you had a larger design. So that would be, just those are some other thread suggestions. If you're using a thread that is a ribbon type thread, you're definitely going to want to use a laying tool. And something that I discovered actually on one of the other calls that we've done is that when you iron the straw silk, it really does look different than if you stitch it as it is directly off the skein or as it comes off the skein. If you're using one of the overdyed threads, a little trick that I've used over and over again and find particularly helpful to keep the color repeats in the proper progression or the artist intended I guess patterning, is to, instead of cutting that skein of thread into pieces, I either roll it onto a card or into a ball and then cut off how much I need, and then I have one continuous piece so that I know that when I'm stopping the last thread or ending the last thread that I've just finished working, when I start the new thread, it's going to be in the right sequence of colors so that I don't have to worry about keeping that straight. If you cut the skein, the straw silk, here's a skein of it right here. This is not the right color, but it comes on a card like this, and so when you take it off, it's going to be in a loop. So let's see if I can do this without making a mess. I think maybe I can. Yeah, I think. Yeah. Okay, so you see it comes off. It's in a loop. Actually, this is not even tied, so I'm not going to go any farther than that. So, because I don't want to have a big tangled up mess on my hands. But it's well, I guess actually what I can do. Let me do this because I've already undone it. So here, what you could do is then take that, find the end like this, and instead of taking this and cutting it, I would then take it and I would wind it around the card that it came from or came off of, and then you can pull it off and you know what color you have because you've got the thread wound onto the card that it came off of. And if you wanted to really make it nice and smooth, then you can either use a flat iron or you can use craft iron. I know there are craft irons out there on the market that are used for quilting, and they're a little triangular head, and you can use those to iron your threads. Honestly, a flat iron works a lot easier, but you do have to be careful to make sure that you don't turn it up too high because you can melt your threads. And I wouldn't say you would necessarily melt this silk thread because silk is pretty tough, but if you have a nylon thread or any type of a man-made fiber, then you would have to be especially careful when using a flat iron. So, all right, so you can see, you can take that and wrap it around the card, and I would typically cut a notch in the card, so that the end would have a place to live. I'm not going to do that right now because I don't have any paper scissors handy, but these come off actually in strands. I had forgotten that. It comes off in long strands, but you do not want to work with a strand that's this long because let's see, that is at least 1.5 yards. So you don't want to cut pieces that long or you don't want to work with pieces that long. I would cut that 1.5 yards into 3 pieces to work with because that's going to give you really a better length of thread to work with. So, all right, so Laverne, wait a minute, look, let me go back. I see Leslie says she used the fishbone stitch for a mermaid's tail. Hey, that's a great idea. I love that. That would be a really fun application for it. And Laverne says she has a palm tree that's part of a nativity, and she thinks she's going to frame it and she's going to frame it up and try this stitch. Good deal. And she says she even has some shades of green straw silk in her stash. So good deal. That'll be fun. You'll have to make sure you share pictures of your progress with us inside the Serendipity Needleworks Facebook group. It's always fun to see everybody's projects there. So I am going to stop winding that thread because I don't need to necessarily be doing that right now. So does anybody have any questions about anything? Because I am more than happy to answer your questions. For those of you who are in the Stitchers Club, you will have more stitches. I mentioned this yesterday during our weekly Wednesday Stitch Together. You will have more stitches. We're actually setting up inside of your member portal a whole new section for the Spring 2020 Threadventure, and that will be going live within the next week. So you'll have the new stitches in addition to this one stitch and the diagrams. So just hang in there with us and we'll get that updated for you ASAP. This was something that I decided to do kind of last minute. The Threadventure was kind of a last minute decision, so it's something that you know, we're working quickly as we can to get things set up so that you all have everything available at your fingertips, easy and quick to find. So, all right. Susie says she uses a battery-powered flat iron and it doesn't get as hot as a regular flat iron. That's a great idea. I love that idea too. That's a really good one. And let's see, Cindy says she just used straw silk for grass and used it also in her manger for her nativity. And she's going to use it on a cornucopia for the husks of the corn. All three great applications for straw silk. It is a really fun thread to work with, and it's really nice to work with too. It's not harsh, you know, on your hands, so I think you'll enjoy it. Bev says, is the Fishbone stitch posted? It is. It's posted on the Serendipity Needleworks website, so we'll just pop back over there real quickly. Let me pull it up and we'll pop back up really quickly and I'll show you. Wait a minute. Let me click on this. So it is down. Let me scroll down. I'm going to try not to go too fast. I don't want to make anybody motion sick. So here you go. This is the diagram for step 1, which is actually, you can see it's just 2 oblique stitches. These stitches are worked in pairs. So you start at number 1, then you count over to the left 4 and up 5 and take your needle to the back at number 2. Then you come back over here to number 3, and so you're just going to count across 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 canvas threads. Bring your needle through to the front at 3 and then count down 5 and over 4. Take your needle through to the back at number 4. And then step 2 is the same thing. It's just dropping down 2 canvas threads from, and actually what you do, you'll notice the starting point at number 1, the starting point of the first stitch, you drop down 2 canvas threads from that starting point to start the second repeat. So you want to be sure that, you know, that you're able to, you get a rhythm going with this one, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You're just dropping down. Each pair is worked 2 canvas threads below the pair that was worked previously. So it's real easy to keep up with where you are. Once you get the first few in place, then you can just fly with this. And then this is step 3, and then of course you just continue on. Step 4 would have 4 pairs of stitches, and then step 5 would have 5 pairs, and so on. So you're just going to continue working along in that manner until you cover the area that you're trying to cover. So that's on the Serendipity Needleworks website, and let me go back up to the very tippy top here. Hang on one second. So if you just happen to log on to the Serendipity Needleworks website, then if you scroll down, this is last week's blog post. In order to get to this week's blog post, you have to actually click on this picture. So if you click on the picture, that'll take you through to this week's blog post, and then you can read all of the information there about the Fairchild Tropical Botanic Garden, which is a really interesting thing. I was really intrigued by that. It was established by a gentleman who lived up outside of New York City, and he dropped out of school when he was quite young and never went to college, but was a very successful accountant, attorney, and maybe even business owner. But he, in fact, actually was one of the founding partners of Price Waterhouse accounting firm. So anyway, all that to say, you know, pretty sharp fella, but he bought a significant parcel of land in South Florida, north of Miami, and then hired this fella who was a landscape architect to design the actual garden, and it opened in 1938. So it's one of the premier gardens, tropical gardens in the world, and they have the largest collection of palms anywhere in the world. So it's very fascinating to read about. And there's a link inside this week's blog post to the Fairchild Garden website. So I would suggest that you check that out, because they've got lots of course, I think they're closed right now, but as soon as all this COVID stuff is laxes up a little bit, then I'm sure they'll open back up. But they have all kinds of educational programs, and their website's quite interesting. So, so let's see. Let's see. We got a couple of questions here. So Bev says that she tried the flat iron trick on thread on the Christmas ornament the other day, and it worked so well. Well, I'm so glad that you found that tip helpful. Mary says, is there any rule of thumb when you are using a vertical stitch, whether you go into the hole of another stitch design or just your own discretion for achieving coverage? Okay, if you're using a vertical stitch, Mary, I'm not sure that I'm following you. This particular stitch is diagrammed in the way that it's intended to be executed. So if you're trying to achieve full coverage, let's look at our example again. If you're trying to achieve full coverage, you can see that I got better coverage over here with this ribbon type thread than I got with my round silk, vineyard silk. So this thread is good for full coverage if you were using tent stitch or a lot of other different decorative stitches too. But in this particular case, because of the way the stitch is diagrammed, it's going to give you, it's going to be more open looking. So if you were trying to achieve full coverage, you would want to find a heavier thread. So you could maybe use, if you didn't want to use the ribbon type thread, then you could maybe use something like, I'm trying to think, silk and ivory would be a good one. You could use, there's a watercolors. I was drawing a blank there. You could use watercolors. You could use multiple strands of Splendor embroidery, silk embroidery thread or DMC embroidery thread, and blend different colors together to create a more overdyed look or a more shaded look to give your thread some depth. So you have a lot of different options there, but if you were going to, I suppose you could scrunch these together so that they would be closer, and I haven't tried that. Actually, let me see what happens when I do that. That's a good question. I don't see why you couldn't do that, but at that point, it would be a variation of the fishbone stitch. It wouldn't be the true fishbone stitch anymore. So I hope that answers that question. Sylvia says that she was born and raised in Florida, and Fairchild is in her childhood memories. That is so neat. I would love to visit there sometime. It apparently is quite massive, though. I mean, just the Palm Park is it covers 13 acres, so you can imagine just how big it is. And so, I mean, and it was just fascinating. Like I said, I feel a real live road trip coming on soon. Carol wants to know, how many gardens are we visiting? We are on the Serendipity Needleworks website, are going to be visiting 7, I think. 7. Yeah, 7. We're visiting 7. So we'll be going through the end of April and then all the way through to the end of May. So let's see. And Anne Marie has joined us. Glad to have you here with us too, and Heidi as well. Susie wants to know, is she asking about an adjoining stitch? You know, she could be. So let me go back up. Let me scroll back up. Okay, so Mary says yes, she is asking about an adjoining stitch. Okay, so if you were talking about a vertical, if you're talking about rows of these side by side, then yes, they can share holes. They definitely can share holes. I was thinking you were talking about whether you wanted to get fuller coverage. So if you scrunched them together, scrunched the stitches together. But yes, indeed, if you were working the stitch side by side, let me see if I can do this fast enough without making y'all wait for too long. If I wanted to come over and do another, hang tight. Let me see. Let me go over. I don't have a good light in here, so I may have to do this. And I'm not the most, I need new glasses. So let's see. Okay, wait a second. 1, 2, 3, 4. Come down. Oh, shucks. Okay, so I think I'm doing what you are asking about, but I'm not sure. So, wait, let me count this one now. I've got to go 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This would be when it would be helpful to be using 13 mesh canvas because I don't have my magnifying glass. So I just kind of winged it and did 2 side by side. Is that, yeah, I'm not sharing my screen. I'm sorry. All right, is that what you were talking about, Mary? If that's what you're talking about, then yes, they can share holes. In fact, I would probably want them to share holes. Okay, I saw something. Okay, somebody was laughing. Now, who laughed at me for not being able to see? Y'all are too funny. I can see. Wait a minute. No, I can't tell who that was. Okay, so anyway, that is how you would do it if you want. Of course, you would start at the top and work your way down because these are not worked in, up and down and up and down and up and down. You would start at the top and work your way down and do the same thing if you were to tie off. Then you'd start again at the top and work your way down because of the way the stitches are layered on top of each other. So, that's just to show you that you can work them side by side. So, let me see. All right. Okay, so Gwen says, let's see, I think she's asking about a hole in a different design on the canvas. Okay, so Mary, if I answered your question, you said yes. Okay, so what about this stitch meeting up with a completely different stitch? Well, basically what you would do is you're just going to work as close to, if you had, okay, let me see if I can, this is obviously not going to be a palm tree, but if you were working this stitch on this bird and say you were going to work the fishbone stitch on the tail, say we were going to work it on the tail, then you would work up to the painted line as close as you could get. And then when you come back with the next stitch that you're going to use here, then you're going to come as close to that stitch as you can get. And it's okay to overlap to create, so that if some of this stitch encroaches upon the stitches that you executed down here, that's okay because you're adding texture and depth to the actual piece. There's no hard and fast rule that says that you have to keep it exactly precisely on that one line because a lot of this is, there's going to be some free form. That's where the compensation comes in. Now, this is an example of an artistically painted canvas, and those are going to be the ones that are going to be, in some ways, the most challenging to stitch with decorative stitches because you have really no distinct line that you're following. But then in another way, because there's no distinct line that you feel compelled to, cover that intersection, cover that intersection, cover that intersection, and make the whole thing fit like a puzzle, you have there's a little more flexibility there in that regard. So it just depends on your perspective. If you are the kind of person who wants all the stitches to fit together like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle fit together, then yeah, you may want to stick with a stitch painted canvas, at least until you get more comfortable with that. Everybody's different. Everybody's personality is different, and the way everybody interprets a canvas. I can promise you that if 10 people sat down and stitched this canvas on their own, you would have 10 different looks. Even if you followed a stitch guide, even if they followed the same stitch guide, the canvas would not look exactly the same because everybody interprets things differently. They see the lines differently, where one thing should start and another thing should stop. So it's really truly your interpretation of the piece, and so there's not a right or wrong, way to stitch something. There is the proper execution of a stitch so that you're following the stitch diagram to make sure that you're putting the stitches in the places or in the order, you're putting them in the order that they're supposed to be put in. But as far as doing something that's going to be quote wrong, there's really not when you're working with the different stitches to create a cohesive piece of fiber art, because that's what you're doing. You're using thread in the same way that a painter uses paint. So I know that may be I don't know, that may not be what you wanted to hear, but I know that if you're working on a project and you're trying to get all of the stitches to fit together perfectly, it's going to be rare that you're going to be able to do that. So you just have to give yourself permission to relax and enjoy it. So let's see. So let me see. Let me read what Susie says. I think she's talking about 2 different stitches using the same hole, the fishbone stitch and another stitch. Yes, you can definitely do that. You can, the 2 stitches can share 2 different, if you have a fishbone stitch next to a mosaic stitch, they can share holes. There's nothing in the world wrong with that. No, not at all. They most definitely can. And I would say that, you know, if you are trying especially to achieve full coverage, then you're most likely going to want that. So, you know, there's not a given rule about that. So it's just up to your artistic interpretation of the piece that you happen to be working on and the situation that you're working on as well. All right, so Nancy says, how do you anchor your thread at the end of series of fishbone stitches? So I would take and go to anchor my thread. Well, let's see if I can do it. I would take it and run it underneath on the back side, and I would do what's called race tracking. So I would go up under the stitches, and then I would and it's going to be hard for me to show you here because I'm not sure that, well, all right, so, whoops. So I would take it up. I hope you can see. Let me see if I can get it close. You can see how I've taken it up. Maybe you can't because it's looped in front. But I've taken it up through the stitches on the back, and then I would come over one of those stitches, turn around. Hang on a second, let me get this so that it doesn't fall off. So what I've done is I've looped it over. Let me see if let me get it in the camera in the right place. So I've looped it over one of those horizontal stitches, and I'm going to pull it down, and then that's going to keep it from, you know, it won't unravel itself. So what I just went up and did won't come back out. I went and hooked it over a horizontal bar, and then I'm pulling it back down, and then you can clip your thread. So basically you go up, make sure that you catch something so that you don't pull out what you just did, hook over a horizontal thread, and then come back down. And so you're making basically a U shape. So that's what's called race tracking. You can do it up and down and up and down, you know, multiple times if you need to. You don't on this, but you could definitely, that would anchor that thread. And to start this particular stitch, I would use a pin stitch. I used a waist knot here just because that was the easiest thing to do. So, but I would use a pin stitch to anchor. Okay, so let's see. Susan says, going back to the palm canvas, and I noticed there is a half palm branch on the lower left side. How would you stitch the palm stitch there? All right, let me go back to that canvas. Let me find it. I'm going to scroll. Okay, so let me share this with y'all so you can see. All right, you can see here what she's talking about. I'm assuming that this is what you're talking about, Susan, that there is half of the palm branch here, and then the other half of the palm branch down here, or the palm frond. So I would stitch 2 here, and then I would pick up and continue. And actually what you can do is you could, and this would be one where I would probably, I'm sorry, I saw something pop up. All right, so this is one where I would probably do this first. I would stitch this palm frond first and then come back and stitch this one. But stitch this palm frond and then tie off, and then come back and pick up with your stitches, and then you can come back in here and do some compensating to just fill in those little gaps where you actually end up, and I would just use straight stitches to do that, but where you end up having that part that's chopped off. And then you can come back and do your trunk on top of that frond. So that's another good example, and it's a great question too, about how perspective comes into play. You have to be aware, or sensitive is not the right word, but you have to be mindful of the perspective that you're creating. You want to make sure that, you know, as you're stitching this palm frond is farther away from the viewer than the trunk. So you want to make sure that you stitch this and this bottom part and the trunk. And then actually this, I would probably stitch this palm frond next because it's on top of the trunk. So, okay, now wait a minute. And what about the one to the left of that one? What? This one? So this would be, So how, all right, so let me make sure that I'm following the question. So how would you stitch that one? Well, as far as that is concerned, this would be a good example of a place where you could use just long straight stitches. Because this is not, it doesn't have the same look. It doesn't have the full, you're not getting the full frontal view of the palm frond. So this would be a place where you could use a different stitch that's a complementary type stitch, something that's that looks similar, but that's not exactly the same. So, for example, here, you could take and do, like I said, long straight stitches, a Gobelin stitch, a slightly slanted Gobelin stitch, an oblique over one and however many tall you need for it to cover. So, Bobby says, what's a pin stitch? Bobby, that's something that's inside the Stitchers Club, and I will share that with you here in just a few minutes, okay? It's actually just an anchoring stitch that you can use in order to get your thread to stay in place without having to use a knot, and it's a real secure way to anchor your thread. But I'll show you where that is inside the Stitchers Club member portal too. There's a video there about it. Okay. All right, good deal. We have actually gone over 15 minutes. I have to hop over shortly to, well, I shouldn't say have to, I get to hop over shortly and spend the next little bit of time with members of the Stitchers Club inside the Stitchers Club Facebook group. So we will be joining together there at 4 o'clock Central Time, which is in about, actually 17 minutes. So we have 17 minutes between now and then. So those of you who will be joining me there, grab yourself something to drink, and I will see you inside that group shortly. Next week, we will have another stitch. Next week, we are going to South Carolina. I'm not telling you where, but we're going to South Carolina. And our next stitch will be a really fun and exciting stitch that you can also use on a different kind of canvas. So I will see you then. And remember, if you haven't taken a look at this week's blog post over on the Serendipity Needleworks website, serendipityneedleworks.com, please make sure you do check that out. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye for now.